Have you ever wondered what it would be like if the NBA did a complete reset of all rosters, voiding all contracts and starting fresh with all players in the association available in the form of a league-wide redraft? Obviously, something that would never happen, as it would create absolute chaos in the sports world, not to mention lawsuits galore from the players, teams, and the networks for their TV deals. But it doesn't stop us from thinking of these hypothetical scenarios in where the league would do a redraft of the entire pool of current players. Would they go with the brightest young talent with the most upside and potential, a player they can build with both for the present and for the future, or would they opt for the more sure thing of drafting an established superstar in their prime, but may not have as many years left ahead of them and having already hit their ceiling? And while I'm sure a lot of you aren't basketball sickos like me who think about this kind of thing, for those that do, I thought it would be fun, with just a few weeks away from the start of the regular season, to do a league-wide draft with all of the NBA's current players available on the board. And I would love to hear how you guys would redraft the NBA as well. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe to help the channel grow, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, one call out in doing this hypothetical draft or redraft is that I will not be doing a hypothetical assignment of which teams get which picks. Say, like using the draft order from this past draft and having the Hawks have the first pick, the Wizards with the second pick, and so on. No, that would more or less be a pointless exercise, as it would introduce biases or assumptions on the part of the competence level of the front office to try and guess if X team would go more for youth or star power. So instead, we're just going to say who would go number 1, number 2, etc., not to any specific teams. And I'm also only going to be doing the top 10 picks, because the video would go on for multiple hours if I drafted the entire league of some 400 players with multiple rounds. And I'm going to start with the number 1 pick, the player I believe if any GM had a chance to take a player in the NBA to start building their franchise around, is Victor Wembanyama. I feel like this one is probably a given, pretty easy, because it's pretty clear that after his rookie season, Wemby is the real deal. The hype is real. He's already considered by most media outlets in their player rankings to be a top 15 player in the NBA at just the age of 20. In my opinion, he's already the best defensive player in the league. I know he was the runner-up to win Defensive Player of the Year award last year, but he should have won it over Rudy Gobert. Only reason he didn't was because of his team's record. Already elite defensively, to where teams are afraid to even drive to the basket when he's down low. And from an offensive perspective, even just from the start of his rookie season to the end of it, he had already shown so much improvement between his handles, his passing, as well as his jump shot. He still has a lot of work to do with his outside shooting, but his efficiency from deep had already shown progress from the start of the year to the end of it. A player that can give you over 20 points and 11 rebounds like it's nothing, while also leading the league in blocks, is one of the better passing bigs because he can handle the ball like a guard, already a star level player, and he's not even close to his prime yet. Yeah, it's an easy choice to take Wemby number 1 in a redraft of the league. How about the second pick though? This one was tough because I kind of went back and forth between two players, but I ended up with the player who is younger, where you're looking for more long-term upside, and that's Luka Doncic. Obviously, Luka is already a consensus top 5 player in the league. Some would say he's even top 3, 25 years old, peak of his prime, with still a lot elite years left ahead of him. You're talking about selecting an already established superstar, but a superstar that isn't on the wrong side of 30, a player that can impact the game in so many ways with his ability to score, shoot it from outside, and shoot it efficiently on high volume. Is one of the highest IQ players in the league, with his impeccable court vision and instincts with running the floor, but also possesses the size where he can bully his way inside to crash the boards on both offense and defense. Yes, Luka is a pretty flawed player defensively, no one will deny that. And to be honest, it's not because he can't play defense, it's that he really doesn't try that hard on the end of the floor. It's why I don't have him going number 1 over Wemby, who is so great on both ends, but also 5 years younger. But regardless of your opinion on Luka, and putting his flaws aside, he's still one of the best players in the NBA and one of the youngest superstars in the league. No question the team is taking him number 2 if Wemby is off the board. With the third pick, I'm taking Nikola Jokic here. In my opinion, and I think most would agree, he's the best player in the world. And he has been for the last couple of years. The only reason I wouldn't take him higher here is because of his age. He's going to be 30 this upcoming season, so not as many prime years ahead of him like Wemby or Luka, but just a basketball savant with his IQ, that court vision, redefining what it means to be a big man in this league with his elite passing like a point guard, but post-up skills and interior footwork like that of Patrick Ewing or Hakeem Olajuwon. Can also shoot it though from outside, not at a high level, but he can take those shots and is enough of a threat that defenses have to respect him when he's out on the perimeter. Yeah, he looks funny sometimes out there, and the way he carries himself isn't the most athletic, isn't going to be giving you insane highlight reels, but he gets the job done. He is the most impactful player on the court, and how much better his team is when he's on the court versus when he's off. first in the league this past season in win shares, box plus minus, both offense and defense, as well as value over replacement player and player efficiency rating. Oh, and actually, he's been at that number 1 spot in all of those categories for the last 4 seasons, winning MVP 3 of those 4 years. Probably should have won it all 4 years, but we'll leave that for another day. Just an absolutely incredible player. We've never seen anything like him in the history of the NBA, and he's a lock for being a top pick in a league-wide redraft. At number 4, I'm taking Gilgeous-Alexander, another player that honestly could have gone as high as number 2, an already established superstar in the league, but also only 26, a lot of great years ahead of him. The ascendance of SGA has just been absolutely amazing of a story, going from being a nice-to-have piece in the package of the Paul George trade from the Clippers, with the picks being the real prize, to becoming a superstar almost overnight and taking the Thunder from being a bottom feeder to the number 1 team in the West. I just mentioned how Jokic should have been named MVP for the past 4 years straight, but there is actually a very strong argument for SGA being deserving of that award this past season with his performance and overall team success. A top 5 player in the league, at his age, still even some upside, and his level of impact on the court, no chance the GM passes on him at number 4 while still being available here. At number 5, this is where I have to take Giannis. The only reason I didn't take Giannis earlier because I personally have him ahead of SGA in terms of the current best players in the league, but it's because Giannis is just nearing 30 years old. I personally would opt for more youth, which is why I took SGA before him, but even still, despite turning 30 in just a few months, Giannis has to go top 5 in a redraft of the league. Like all players, he's obviously got his flaws, doesn't shoot the ball well, which is pretty important in today's NBA, but he's so explosive with his size, strength, and speed in getting downhill and finishing at the rim that his lack of shooting almost doesn't matter. And unlike a lot of the other guys I just mentioned before him, namely Jokic and Doncic, Giannis is an elite defender. I will say his defense has fallen off a bit in the last couple of seasons, but I think that's also because more is being asked of him offensively. But let's not forget, we're not that many years removed when he became the 3rd player in NBA history to win the MVP and Defensive Player of the Year award in the same season. 5-time All-Defensive Team player, so even though his defense hasn't been on the same level as it was in his mid-20s, he's still a top defender in the league, and of course, one of the best scorers in the game, while also continuing to improve his overall passing with each passing season. Last season, putting up a career high in assists at 6.5. That's why I have Giannis going 5th overall. At number 6, got to take Anthony Edwards. Ant Edwards last season really showed why he's up next as one of the faces of the league in the future. We're getting to that time where LeBron, Kevin Durant, Steph are going to be riding off in the sunset of retirement soon. And Ant, like some of these other guys I mentioned, is the next man up. Just a dominant season from Anthony Edwards last year, leading the Timberwolves to one of their best records in decades, taking them to the conference finals for just the 2nd time in their franchise's history. If you caught my video where I ranked every NBA franchise in history, you saw that the Wolves were tied for last in overall accolades with the Clippers. But with Edwards as the face of their franchise for the future, they're going to be in good hands. Anthony Edwards' scoring prowess, where he's become an elite finisher at the rim, but also a higher volume 3-point shooter, and his improved ability to get to the free throw line have made him one of the more dynamic scorers in the game. And let's not shy away from his improved defense as well. And aside from Wemby, Edwards is the youngest player so far on this list at just 23 years old, with still more upside and a high ceiling to superstardom. At number 7, this is where I'm taking my first quote-unquote older player, and I say that in quotes because really these guys aren't that old by the world standards, but I'm taking Steph Curry at number 7. Ironic that I'm taking him number 7 in a redraft 15 years after he was drafted 7th in 2009. And the reason I'm taking Steph so high over some of the other players who are a bit younger and have more years ahead of them is mainly if you're a GM and you're doing a draft reset of the entire league, you also have to consider the business side of basketball as well. And if the guys I just mentioned, 1 through 6, aren't available, you also have to start thinking about what's going to drive the most viewership and revenue to your team. Maybe not necessarily future upside and who you're going to build around, but who's that surefire player that's going to be your cash cow that can still play at a high level now and keeps you relevant while also building for the future with other young players later on down the line in the draft. I mean, he's the greatest shooter of all time. He's one of the most recognizable athletes globally, literally changed how the game was played, and the reason the Warriors tickets remain so astronomically high despite the fact that they're a pretty average team that didn't even make the playoffs this past season. Still a top player in the NBA, still the best 3-point shooter in the NBA, still a player that can win a championship depending on the pieces you have around him. 36 years old, but boy, would I be tempted to take Steph if given the opportunity in a league-wide redraft. At number 8, I got to take Joel Embiid. The reason I hesitate a bit is because He is injury prone, he's 30 now, and despite his absolute dominance in the past couple of seasons, he still hasn't shown up very well in the postseason, having never made it beyond the second round of the playoffs in his entire career. Not that all of that is his fault, but he's the team's best player and leader. Most of the burden is going to fall on him. But that said, I'm still taking Embiid because he's such a beast and a force to be reckoned with down low. So many teams just don't have an answer for this guy. Yeah, his antics are a bit annoying at times, mainly the flopping and dirty plays, but he's one of the top scorers in the league, a beast on the boards, has become a high-level passer, adopting some of the skills we've seen from Jokic, acting as a hub on offense in the middle, block shots at a high level, strong defensive player, a very well-rounded big man that I still believe would go top 10 in a league-wide draft. At number 9, again, another legacy athlete whose prime days have passed and likely only has a couple years ahead of him, although we've been saying that for a while now. But because of his name, his likeness, influence, and marketability around the world, from a business standpoint, you almost have to take LeBron James here. Man is about to be 40 years old. And why are you going to take a 40-year-old if you're given the entire pool of NBA players to draft your franchise? Well, one, he's still playing at a high level. We saw it this past season. We saw it at the Olympics and helping the U.S. win gold. He's still one of the best players in the NBA. Some would argue he's still a top 10 player in the league. But more importantly, it's LeBron James, one of the greatest players to ever play the game of basketball. Selecting him is a win in and of itself, purely from a revenue-generating perspective, even if you put the skill aside. I don't see how you can't take LeBron here, of course, based on all the other selections you end up making to round out your roster with your younger players. And then finally at number 10, this is a tough one as well, but I'm going to take Jayson Tatum. I know Jaylen Brown outshined him in the playoffs on their run to the championship, but Tatum is still the best player in the Celtics, still the most well-rounded and lethal players on the court. The man that led the Celtics to the best record in the league, a record that no team was even close to this past season. And while I had guys like Kevin Durant, even Devin Booker, maybe even Paul George or Kawhi, I went with the youth pick on this one, given Tatum is only 26 years old, more peak years left ahead of him. People forget he had his most efficient season yet last year. It was as if all that was just washed away because of what people saw in the playoffs, which still wasn't bad, it's just that he wasn't as good as Jaylen Brown. But with Tatum in his prime, more years to build with, I decided to take him over these other players that likely would follow right behind him in a league-wide draft of Kevin Durant, Paul George, Anthony Davis, Devin Booker, Jalen Brunson, even Tyrese Halliburton. So there you have it, my top 10 picks if a league-wide redraft were to happen today. Let me know where you guys agree or disagree in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.